Dobra. Hi everyone, I am Adrian Pulbinski, currently working as a senior front-end developer in Millennium Company, and today I have opportunity to present you, I think, pretty cool topic about scalable architecture in the React applications. So I would like to explain goals of this presentation. So first of all, I would like to introduce you the process of designing the scalable architecture on the front end. Nextly, I would like to change some kind of perception about front-end application. Next, I would like to showcase you an example of refactor rewrite process, which I did for this presentation purposes. And nextly, some kind of productivity improvements, change in the work style to more stable one. And I would like to show you example of Redux observable-based architecture in the React projects. Agenda. So first, we will cover the topic about think, design, then code. So instead of just sitting near the keyboard and randomly typing some kind of solutions for your tasks or tickets, much better idea will be just to plan and design what you will implement in the future. So this will be a little bit of discussing this. Nextly, we will check how end-to-end tests can save your skin in really risky moments in the project. Nextly, we will design the architecture, so we'll discover the process, how we can achieve and gather the benefits of well-designed architecture. And lastly, I will just show you the rewrite and refactor process. We'll summarize everything, and that will be end of the presentation. Of course, if you don't have any further questions. So, firstly, why I am talking about think, design, and code? Because I saw in many projects situations like developers just came into a feature and start to write to make it work, and after that you have some kind of technical debt after several months. Yes, and without architecture, basically installing Redux is not it's implements some kind of architecture, flux variation, but it doesn't mean that your code will don't be ugly and you will don't have any problems with the maintenance of this code. So it's really important to firstly think, design, and then code. So today we will just implement something like this. So basically it will be the feature for office management. As you can see, I can choose the city, I can choose the country, I can just type the address, postcode. I have validation. This is multi-step form. Nextly, I'm adding here office zones. So for example, if someone is sitting near a dedicated desk, every desk have dedicated identificator. Same for parking zones, because everyone need basically parking space in the companies. Here we choosing how much space we have in the dedicated parking zones, and this is summary. Yeah, basically, as you can see here, we can create office, and if we type some kind of URL with /ID, it's not seen here, but basically if you just open the URL with the ID, you can just edit dedicated office, load it, prefetch, and just manipulate the data. Feature is not big. Basically, there is some kind of operations, but the requirements for client is that it should be maximum responsive to user interactions. So, for example, if I change the decision, it should don't have any flashes, any different UI glitches, etc., etc. It should be fluent without any problems, and yeah. So usually it will look like if you will have some kind of dead space deadline for that, you will just try to code this as fast as you can, and probably it will be looking like the code on the right side which you see right now. So a lot of code which is coupled, basically a lot of nested callbacks, a lot of state manipulations, if statements in one place. There is also a problem with the cohesion here, because there is no single responsibility in this code. Basically, logic is connected with the presentation, and this logic is kind of dirty because, as you can see here, there is a lot of his if statements, a lot of nested code. And this code just handling or maintaining the feature which is not basically big enough to describe it as a game changer in the project. It's just simple form for manipulating some kind of typical data in the project. Yeah, and What will happen when, for example, you will enter this project as a developer and you will see code like this? It will be not cool. Basically, you will just probably wrap your head and say some bad words about your teammates. But yeah, this is often mechanism which can be found in projects, and it's always like that when someone just starts writing code and he don't have enough time, or he is just a person which don't want to plan before coding. It's always looking like that. So what you can do with that? So it will of course not happen if you have well-designed architecture, but let's imagine that you don't have. You just have that code in project. So you can basically choose the framework for testing, like Cypress, for example, in that case. And you can write end-to-end tests, as you can see here, which will guarantee you after refactoring, changing the architecture and changing the further file structure, state management stuff, even a framework for frontend, it will guarantee that will still work. Yes, so you don't waste time for writing unit integration tests from the, for example, in the jest. Yes, if you would write those tests in the jest, you have 100% guarantee that after changing the framework, architecture, implementation, there is a big risk it will fail. Yeah, and it can basically just you can basically just waste your time to writing those tests. So much more efficiency is just write end-to-end tests for that, and later do refactors, start rewriting process. Yeah, and there is an example of test which you can basically write. This test just goes to the office management, as you can see here. Just find the input for the country, clicks it, then choosing the first country. Same situation for the city. Nextly, we just populating the address. Next is the postcode. We confirming button. We just populating next steps, and basically that's all. Same situation or same test case can be applied for editing and for some kind of edge case, like going forward and backward and see how the interface and whole feature behaves. Yeah, and to be honest, sorry, some kind of glitch in slide looks like. Okay, so to be honest, tests like that, like this one, are pretty cool because we are framework agnostic, as I said. We are more user friendly from the perspective, like we are as a testers, we testing from the user perspective, not from the developer perspective. So test will be not fragile, but it will be if we will write those in the jest and in the technology related to the dedicated framework, yeah, like React testing library, etc. They are also executed in Trophy environments, so we checking how our code base in the frontend relies and work with the backend code. Also, we can just check and investigate visual aspect regression. There are a lot of widgets or plugins basically connected to the Cypress, which can help us detect any visual regression. And I will strongly recommend you always, when you have some kind of big refactors, big rewriting process, just write some kind of end-to-end test for basic paths and maybe some for edge case, which are tricky, to make sure that it works as before. Yeah. And when end-to-end tests are better than unit and integration tests, when the code is just pure crap. Yes, basically, if you have well-structured code and you have architecture and you're just following the architecture, the unit and the unit and integration tests are very valuable. But if you have crap code, it's really hard to write tests for such a code. And much better approach is just write end-to-end test. And of course, when you have time for it, because writing end-to-end tests, it's a little bit longer than writing, for example, unit and integration one. But in my opinion, it's worth it to write one good end-to-end test than unit and integration one. Okay, so before we design the architecture, I would like to show you and analyze the problems of the current code base. Okay, so let me change the branch. I prepared for you. Of course, the materials will be shared after this meeting. I prepared you several branches when we implement the same feature in different ways. For example, with the Redux, with the context API, without Redux, with the modular architecture. You can just check it after the meeting. I will just cover the ugliest part of this and the best, in my opinion, part of this. Okay, so we'll just see this one. Okay. And let's check. This is the code which I show you before in this GIF presentation. So basically, as you can see here, there is a lot of code, like almost 700 lines. And let's just check the worst part of this code. Yes, so basically here we have form. So it means in the form we have usually validation. Here we just handle it in the place when we're entering the content. Basically, it's just glued together. Yes, so it will be cool to have, for example, separate hook for that. Yes, also the validation process is hard coded. So basically, as you can see here, after, for example, changing value in the form, I'm just running everything and just validating it manually. Yes, we can just have some kind of mechanism which allows us in the generic way to handle that process, to avoid boilerplate and make it consistent across different files and different forms. Yes, and also code will be more reusable. Also, what is really ugly, we're handling a lot of logic in the use effects. So basically, when you handle logic in use effects, you have always problems like if you will rely on something in future, you need to add into the dependency array, and you have more stuff to rely, you need to add them also. And later you just end it with like if statements, which checks is value changed or not. And it's really ugly, and I don't recommend this. There is an option with using, for example, observable pattern, or I don't know, maybe the Redux and user stuff, but we will cover it later. Here, which is also what is also ugly, is like we have some kind of endpoint which we're calling. Yeah, we are mocking values here just for the purpose of presentation. In real world application with the API, it will be just calling endpoint like this. Yeah, but we don't have endpoint. I can provide API, so I'm just mocking that. And what is ugly, we just handling this in this component. We can just create some kind of hook which allows us to, for example, use fetch or use prefetch data before we render the component. And a lot of stuff similar to this one, like, for example, if here, yeah, if preloading, if editing, if creating, we're just rendering the rocket. So it's the loader which we're displaying. It's really bad because if, for example, there will be some kind of state update performed in a valid way, so we forget to reset those flags, it can just perform some kind of UI glitch, like you will see rocket for a second, and this is pretty bad. Same situation for the error handling. Yes, it's also not good. And after that, we just checking if it's created or not, or it's edited. If it's created, we just rendering different message, and if it's edited, we rendering different one. Yes, and a lot of other logic which is super ugly for submitting form. I would like to avoid diving into that because it's pure crap. So just to save your eyes and time, let's just scroll at the bottom to the rendering part. Here, for example, we're rendering the layout basically on the current step. So for example, if we have step details, we're rendering this part of code. Yes, we have text screen zones, rendering this part of code. This code is pure crap, as I said, and you never should have something like this because it's ultra big technical debt. And I saw so many times that in project you have such a code, and it's basically developer fault, to be honest, because if you will design architecture, maybe not perfect because we don't have perfect architectures, but you will just design something and you will just follow that, you will never end with the code base like this one. Okay, so let's just go further. Yeah, so from current slide. Yeah, so we understand the feature, but for example, let's imagine that this application is a little bit bigger. So for example, instead of just one screen, you have a lot of other screens, yes? And for example, clients have requirements like, and you know that requirements because before you start basically application, you have some kind of basic screens for that, yes? So usually, not always, but usually, in that case, you have that screens. And you know that there is a lot of views when you would like to go from the one view to another and inject some kind of state to boost a little bit user process and avoid for him populating data. You just would like to inject it from the other view. Yes, of course you can do it via routing, but it's not so easy to do it via routing. Yes, you can just inject via routing, but you need to handle some kind of state in the route and some kind of state in the React code base. It's pretty hard to achieve, so you can just do it better. And you know that. And for this case, the perfect example and the perfect use case will be the architecture based on the Redux. So basically, you can just recreate any part or any moment in application via dispatching actions, and you have basically have everything logged, for example, in the files or in the memory. So you can just basically check what's going on in the user journey. You can easy handle async logic via dedicated action creators, etc., etc. So I will choose for this one Redux and RxJs, which implements observable patterns and allows us to handle async code in really easy way. But before that, let's implement let's design the architecture. So currently we have something like this. We have feature, like in our case, office management feature. It consumes some kinds of services, so it means our endpoints and this method which you saw a moment before, and some kind of models, the basically TypeScript interfaces, and utils like, I don't know, mappers, some kind of array methods, additional, some kind of, I don't know, maybe filtering methods, etc. Just simple util stuff like in every project. We could divide our current solution of office management in logic and presentation. So we will have components and we will inject into them some kind of callbacks and properties, and they will reflect these components and make them look a little bit different or behave a little bit different. But still, it will be not enough because we will have a lot of hooks, a lot of components which we need to group somehow, and it will be really hard to determine the structure of this, yes, because this is just two building blocks, logic and presentation. It's not enough in the current front-end applications. So we can do better. We can just divide our application into layers, like application, yes, our system, to be honest, into application, which will contain dedicated features like office management, like user management, like, I don't know, dashboard, etc., etc. State management will be a separate library for this. I will tell for a second why. We will have some kind of other library for communicating with APIs, and we have other libraries like forms management, mappers, etc., etc., etc. This is pretty atomic, maybe not atomic, but it's divided by some kind of roles in the system. Yeah? Like if you will have state management connected with the application part, it will mean you will have connection with the presentation layers. So if you will have from client requirement, hey, I would like to separate application, but for the desktop, because mobile is not good for me in some kinds of cases, it will mean that you will need basically write from scratch everything. With that approach, you can basically have state management, and you can just write other representation for that, yes? And you can have basic state management for that, and you can just enhance the part for the desktop. So you can just add additional features or remove not needed because they are only relied on the mobile, yes? So it's much more easy to work with that later, yes? And it scales pretty good because if you have, for example, different state managers, you can just use the APIs part. You can just use forms in the different parts of applications. So it's pretty cool. Okay, and to understand it a little bit, we need to zoom in because diagram is not enough to understand that approach, okay? So I will show you for a second all of these libraries which we implemented in the branch when I think implementation is the best, okay? So let's zoom in to this feature. By zooming in, I mean I will just show you the step by step, the code base, and I will just discuss how it affects current feature. Before that, just last diagram, when we zoomed in into the dedicated parts of this architecture, like for example, we just zoomed into state management, we just zoomed in into application layer, we have something like this, yes? The building blocks of our system, like we have module, we have container, we have components, we have facades, we have selectors, dispatches, full Redux stuff, etc. And we have other, yeah? As you can see here, module is entry point of the feature. So for example, if I have office management, I can easy off or on this feature by just commenting the module. That's all. And it's done. It doesn't work. I don't need to change anything other in the application. Yes, it's decoupled from other part of the systems. I have containers which just connects basically presentation layer with the Redux, nothing more. The connection, yes. After I have facade, facade is just needed for the future. If I would like to move from the Redux to, for example, context API, or for example, to the other state manager, I can just change this in the facade and just replace it here with just something different, and I don't need to change the containers, components, and modules itself. Yes, this is some kind of guard between making some kind of refactors in the future. And facade just consumes selectors for the state and dispatch actions, nothing more. Yes, and all other stuff is just typical Redux building blocks. So I think we can just skip and don't cover them. Here you have services, so it means the API connections with the backend and dedicated models to TypeScript definitions, basically. Nothing fancy. Looks a little bit weird because I don't have. I tried to maybe visualize that a little bit better, but I think when you just check the code, it will be 100% clear for you. Okay, so let's check the code. So we need to change the branch to the Redux observable architecture better. This code is compiled, and let's just see. We have here, let me just open the presentation with the diagram so we can just reflect what is going on the diagram and in the code base. So let's start from the application part. Yeah, we have module, this building block. And this is this one. I'm adding here a postfix to have an option to easily find in the search. Like if I would like to check all modules, I can just do it like this. Yeah, it's pretty easy for me to track those kind of building blocks in the system. What module does? He just lazy loads all feature, basically, to avoid logic of this in the other application parts. Just the logic is here, yeah, and renders the content, renders the components, and just renders the first building block, which is container / controller. It doesn't matter. Yes, this is just naming convention, but basically in the controller we will just connect the via facade the Redux with our React application. And here also I have steps provider, which is basically just some kind of context API wrapper for handling steps. Yes, I don't want to handle logic of going through the form in the Redux, because let me just refresh the page or recompile it, because I changed the branch, so probably, yeah, I need to recompile. Let me start. I don't want to handle step changing logic in the Redux. It's because if I just would like to render the form without those steps, it will be connected with the Redux. So I need to refactor Redux. Yes, in Redux I have just only have business logic, yeah, not the logic how I presented my formula, because I can just render everything and it should work, or I can just hide some kind of parts in this form and it should work as the same. I shouldn't touch my state management. Yes, so for this I have some kind of dedicated util component called steps provider. We just use the context API and propagates option to go next or go to pref, and gives me the flags like is last, is first, and what about current step. Yes, and just injects this information to the children. So it's basically kinda easy to understand and nothing more. Yes, so logic for changing steps is kinda generic, can be used in the different forms. It's not related to the any application domain. It's just basically can use everywhere, and it's used in this module. Yes, so it just propagates down. So lazy loading and propagating some kind of visual stuff down to the components tree, nothing more. And if I would like remove this logic or remove this feature, I can just go and comment it. Yes, the goal of these modules is like I can just change totally the way how it's implemented. I can just delete it via just one comment, and I, for example, can also feature flag that. So for example, if I have situation when my business would like to feature on or off, I can just go to the one place and just perform one if statement, and it's done. I don't need to touch any other code base. Next layer is like containers / controllers. So in that layer, we just have logic, yeah, like here, encapsulated in the facade. So just look at the diagram. We have container, yes, container renders components and consumes facades, yes, and we have here that situation. So this office desk container controller, I just make a typo here probably, is just related to pick state from the Redux and dispatch some kind of actions but not directly, but via facade, which is here. Yes, facade dispatches these actions, and facade gives me state or performs some kind of util mappings. Yes, so I don't have this code in the in this component. And also in the unit test, integration test, I can just easily mock this and see how my component behaves. Yeah. And facade itself, as I said, is just the taking of the dedicated part of the Redux and have option to dispatch and dispatching action here. So for example, if nextly I would like to remove the Redux, I can just go here and perform some kind of other function, and it will have the same interface. Implementation here will be different, but the same interface is consistent, so I don't need to touch any code here. It's much less work than I will normally perform if I will not have this one. Yeah. And I did it because for the dedicated examples, it was much easier for me to re-implement it with the context API with those facades. So I don't need to waste time of the additional refactors and going to the files. Yes. As I said, it's not a perfect architecture. It's just my view of how you can just group and connect dedicated stuff in applications. Yes. And last one, components. So basically just pure presentation, not connected with the business logic of applications. So it's just like footers, buttons, etc., but only related to this feature. So these components are only used here. Yes. I have, of course, components for the design systems, but this is dedicated library, like here, as you can see here. I have library like which rendering the bells, bar charts, avatars, alerts, etc., and it's, as I said, separate library. Like my utils, as you can see here, development kit, I have here API handling, forms, arrays, etc., and state management is also separate library. Yes, so it's not connected with the application so hard. It's like I'm just installing library for state management, and it contains all business logic which I would like to have, and I just connect this logic with the any part of presentation. It can be Angular, it can be, I don't know, pure JavaScript, etc. Doesn't matter. And this is the application part. So we covered this blue box. And right now, let's just dive into this one because it's pretty easy. So this one will be just used by the Redux, our state management, and it's just a bill of space services. So here we're handling all logic connected with retrieving data, and we exposing dedicated APIs to retrieve that, and we hiding this logic from application core. Yes, so we have here, for example, factory, which allows us to create some kind of service, and here we just typing what we passing through, what kind of payload we passing to the API call, and here what the API returns for us. Yes, so I can just go to the dedicated component and, for example, do like this: import this from the, of course, in the state manager, import this, and just subscribe it, and it will just perform a call with the correct routes, with the dedicated URLs, and will just keep consistent the naming conventions like I'm using in the my REST API. Yes, and it's handled in the one place, so it's really easy to affect for system. Just going here and, for example, change it here. Yes, it's pretty easy. I'm always importing the functions instead of the configs, so it's much easier to refactor any of the code. And for other stuff, like for the offices retrieving, for the countries retrieving, etc. Also models, some kind of shared models, which will be used in the state manager. So this is this one. Yeah, mappers, forms are just libraries, like everything. So I have in those libraries, I have just reusable logic. For example, the logic for validation, which is pretty common. Yes, like you have, if you have application, you have forms, so you have some kind of validators, and they are implemented here in the generic way. I have mechanism which allows me to run those validation. I have some kind of unit integration test. I have implementation for the Redux toolkit of this form wrapper, yes, which I showed for a second, and etc. So library can be anything basically, like arrays management. Like here, I have method just which allows me just go and import like array by which key I would like to remove, for example, ID and the value. Yes, so for example, if ID have value 0, I will remove this element from this array. Some kind of utils, yes, based on the functional programming concepts. And the last one, I think the most complex, but the most cool, in my opinion, of course, is the part when you have build space store. So you have here a state management, yes. So this is typical to the Redux toolkit. You have basically the initial file when you have a boilerplate setup, yeah. One difference is that we just, instead of using Redux tank, we're just using the Redux observable middleware for handling as async stuff, which I show for a second. We have typically selectors, which we are exporting. We have reducers. We have const, actions, typical Redux stuff, yeah. And we have, of course, office management. And in office management, I would like to start from, for example, const, yes. So here I declared some kind of important information for other parts of the system that I'm using some kind of setup when I just doing validation, etc. To reuse it in the other part of the system, yes. Nextly, I have models. So I have I just typed my state in the application, and this looks kinda weird for the persons who didn't saw before the exhaustiveness checking mechanism in TypeScript. Basically, it tells like you don't have big state with the, like we have in the previous version, and we have created true, creating false, create fail, false or true with those flags. You just have versions of state. Like for example, version of state idle means is just the object, basically like that, object with the status idle, yes, nothing more. But for example, version of state like state creation is just version of state when you have status creation and you have additional data like form, yeah, and countries, for example. And you have those versions of states, and you're just creating the union of them. So before you use this state, you need to check in which stage of state you are actually. It's super useful when you have complex state management. In that case, we have a little bit tricky state management because we need to check on which process actually we are, and we can just easily determine that by one if statements instead of doing like before, editing false, yeah, creating false. Right now, it's not needed. We're just doing like this. Status is equal to addition. More, yeah. And it means also when we just try to read the state inside, it will automatically know that the property of form exists and countries exist already. Yes, so it's pretty useful. And we can just check in the slice. So in slice, I encapsulated, for example, all needed logic and in the actions. Yes. So for example, first action will be prepare. I dispatching prepare action. I passing to office ID, and I changing the stage to the preparing, yeah? And I can just easily determine in which stage I am in the interface later, yes? Initial state is stage idle, nothing more. But for example, when I am in the creation phase, it means I prefetched all data, and I have this data, as you can see here, form and countries, yeah? And what is the cool stuff, if I would like to read my state, the current stage, as you can see here, nothing more, expected stage is shown here, yes? If I just add here if as current stage, for example, creation, inside I have as current, but more properties, yes? So TypeScript guards me to avoid some kind of typos or different problems with the state answering and state design problems, yes? Next, and in those actions, we have just logic, the business logic. Like when I'm dispatching addition, I just prefetch data from the server, yes, and I just setting this data, and I just setting this data in the form and validating it immediately, yes, like this. If I, for example, adding office zone, I'm just getting actual state, and what I did, I'm changing the property in the form office zones, and I'm just adding this property to the list of the office zones, yeah. So just simple actions, yes, nothing more. No, basically no side effects here because we shouldn't do side effects in the actions in the Redux, and that's all. Selectors, typical stuff in the Redux, but what is cool here, I'm using something which is called guard, TypeScript guard, yes. So for example, let's check the guard which I called get setable state. So if the current stage is creation or addition, it means I have loaded data already, yeah. I just returning the state. If not, I'm throwing exception. So if I in the interface I will use selector like get countries, but I will still be in the stage, for the example, idle, but on a different stage, I will have exceptions. So it will mean for me that I am using selector in wrong time in the application, because I shouldn't use data when it's not loaded yet. Yes, it's mistake. If I will just use simple flags for that, there is a big chance to do a mistake. Right now, TypeScript will otherwise catch us if we just did such mistakes. So it's pretty useful. And here I have config. So as I said before, I'm encapsulating here form management logic. Yeah. So I'm just creating here initial state. And here I'm just performing the validators, configuring that. Yes. So I'm saying that country RD so should be required. I'm saying address should be required and should be type of address. So it means you have format of address. Yes. I'm saying the office zones cannot be empty and should be in range of the 1 and 100. Yes. And I'm saying that every office zone should be unique by name. Yeah. So here logic is encapsulated of the form inside the Redux toolkit form, which I have in my library. And I'm just consuming this initial state, which I have here, and function set. Set just changes the value. So if I call set, for example, with the city ID as a value like this, city ID and value, like I don't know, 1, it will run behind the scenes the validation and return for me the state of the validation. Like, for example, here we have values, yes? Sorry, not here, but in the slices or in the components like controllers. Here, you can just easy check the values of the form, or if you would like to check something more like, let me just find the place for here, yeah? So if I just type here form, I have here everything what I would like to have, yes? Valid, invalid, such a case in the form, errors, confirmed, not confirmed, etc., etc. But it's fully integrated in the Redux, yes? So it's pretty cool. And you can just check in the timeline what is going on with the actions when you're dispatching those actions. And I think the last part of this, before we go further, is just the part of the Apex. So in Apex, we're handling all logic for the retrieving data and managing async operations. So imagine situation. I am opening the view and I am dispatching the action prepare. So it will mean this will be called, because we're filtering here only if action prepare will be called, then do anything what is below. And we're passing with the action prepare office ID, which is optional, can be undefined or can be a number. And if it's undefined, it means we're going to the creation path. But if it's not undefined, it will mean that we need to edit. So we need to load more data, not only dictionaries like countries, yes, because countries are used for the displaying the countries list, yes. But here we also needed countries and current office from the database. So we just loading more data, yeah. Here I'm using the RxJs. We don't have time to cover that, but RxJs, to keep it short, allows you to handle async code in a really easy way and perform some kind of operators like slowing down something, like debouncing, throttling, caching errors in a really efficient way, and mapping, remapping, zipping, connect the request, etc., etc. RxJS is cool library, so I recommend to use that, especially with the Redux. It works pretty cool. I think long time ago Netflix have a presentation about that. So they describe they migrate whole Netflix application to the real-time Redux with the TypeScript plus this RxJS stuff. And in my projects, which I have used this, it works really cool. You can just do everything with that. And the code is always similar. For the person who don't work with that before, it can be like magic, but it's like everything in the life. Like if you see something first time, for example, Cypress is like also looks like magic, to be honest. And same situation is with that. So here I have just dispatching an action, checking is office ID defined or not. If it's undefined, it will mean I need to load data. And if I just load data, I'm mapping it to the another action. So just dispatching next action via map, yeah. And it means office management actions, that creation, and just passing the countries, and I just handling in the slice, yeah. Let me check where it is. In that place, for example, yes. So I'm just passing the state, passing the action, and here I'm just setting the state updated based on the response from the backend. Yes, I'm just trying to keep actions as simple as I can and avoid any additional logic in the action. So right now we just covered this one. As I said, we don't have time for the cover every part of this, or to cover every aspect. Yes, the presentation, what I would like to show you, if you will just follow some kind of architecture which you designed previously, or you just pick already designed architecture, you can just have a lot more maintainable code base at the end. Of course, at the beginning it takes a little bit more time, but it's just an investment in time, so you will have benefits from that after some kind of time, and yeah. So revise the factor, I just showed it a moment ago. I recommend you just to load the repository, which will be linked at the end of the beginning. Try to play with that. Here I am also using the technology which is called NX, and this is technology which allows you to have monorepo and maintain that by the CLI. So basically, you have in one repository have several projects like libraries, like applications, like end-to-end test mechanisms, like I have here. Yes, it's separate application. I can just basically create another application totally different, but I will have access to those libraries, and I can just do it by one command, create those kind of project. I can create React project, Angular project, Node.js, Nest.js, etc., etc. So everything is described here in the README files. If you would like to have look at this, I will just it will be really good for me and for you also probably. And I think that's all. So conclusions. Yeah, so I just would like to show you that it's not a good architecture perfect. Yes, it's really up to it's determined by the project. So if you have project and you will try architecture, design it, you should just consider several things like the technology, like the client requirements, like the type of application. It's more server side rendered or client side rendered, or maybe it's just a static side, or maybe it's some kind of hybrid. So you need to really think about that before you just pick something. And really, I recommend to just try to plan something before you start coding, just at least once, to see the difference. Yes, because the difference is kind of big. It's not. It's usually said that TDD methodology is kinda good because you have option to think before you start coding, and it's true. The someone who used the TDD have probably the good experience with that, because it saves a lot of time later in the debugging and later with the bug finding stuff. And code is out of better because you think before you code. And the goals, looks like there is a loop. So this looks like there is a loop. So conclusions, link and materials. Let me just because I'm from the beginning, from current slide. Yeah, so here you have the link to the article which describes other kind of architecture, more related on the context API, just different approach. Yes, so it's just deep dive in. And on the right side, probably because I am not able to read from the QR codes, you have an option to just go to the GitHub repository, which I showed you 1 second before, and you can just play with it. Yes, if you have some kind of advices for me, or I don't know, comments, questions, I will be glad to hear them right now, maybe after. Feel free to do it if you would like. And thank you. Okay, super.